Good afternoon. This is Daniel Patrick Brennan. This is the Wine is Food podcast, and I am here with Jesus Ceja in the Sonoma Valley. My interview with my first brewer on the podcast, but also a wine grower, so a lot of crossover here, a lot of things to talk about. And as I just commented, I don't really know too much about certainly the brewery at this stage because it's in its infancy stage. I got a lot of questions, and I don't know much about brewing, so I got a lot of questions. But you could say hello to people in podcast land and iTunes and all that kind of stuff.
Well, thank you for having me, Daniel. It's a pleasure to be spending this great afternoon. It's beautiful outside here in Sonoma Valley, and what better thing to do than talk to you
and sit in a brewery.
Yeah, exactly, and enjoy a few of the great beers.
That's right. I think this might be the first podcast I've had a beer during. We always seem to want to have drink some wine and toast some wine, but I think this is a little more appropriate. So we are in a beautiful new facility, but I guess how long has this building been here?
The structure's been here for a couple of years. The brewery has been in the making for a couple of years. It's a project that was initiated among five Ceja brothers. We all have different backgrounds. I am the brewer, the Brewmaster. I actually went to UC Davis through the brewing program, did an internship while I was going to through the brewing program with Coors, and they had a phenomenal program where you learn the whole aspect of brewing, from quality control, walking through the barley fields, all the way up through packaging. They're vertically integrated, and so whatever you need to make a glass of beer, they're in the business of making it happen.
Yeah, figuring it out. Yep.
Yeah.
Now, going back to your family there, I did stop by here last year with Macadio, who I've also interviewed on this podcast, and it was a bunch of I get lost in the family because I'm only coming in and out, so maybe see you guys once a year or twice a year. But there was a bunch of brothers who seemed to bring a lot of different skills to the table. Some engineers, I believe, probably some guys who know some stuff about motors and plumbing and carpentry and all kinds of stuff. So, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your family and how big it is and a lot of the different stuff going on in the area that you guys are involved in.
Yeah, we're a migrant family with a very humble background. So there's 10 siblings, 7 brothers, 3 sisters. And we had the opportunity to basically gain different skills among the family. So one of my brothers, he's an engineer. He's the oldest of the brothers. He's actually one of the co-owners of Ceja Vineyards. That they have a boutique set of wines here in Napa and Sonoma Valley. And he is very focus on the details of engineering systems and so on. Another brother, the second oldest, is Nacho, and his background is actually architecture. Mm-hmm. So he has his own construction company and builds a lot of structures and so on. And the other brother is the winemaker. He's Armando, and he makes wine for Ceja Vineyards. And I'm going in sequence. So the other brother is Martin, and he's the mechanical engineer, if you will. He fixes tractors and that's in the business of working on heavy equipment. And
so far, all very important jobs.
Yeah, and establishing a brewery and making it work, absolutely. And then it's me. As I mentioned, I went to Davis, went through the brewing program. I have a master's in business administration, and then the last partner is my younger brother Manuel, and he's an engineer. He works for Procter & Gamble and does a lot of stuff for them, but he's also a partner of the brewery.
Now, did you mention you were out in like the Midwest working for somebody as well? I thought
Yeah, so when I graduated out of UC Davis, as I mentioned, I did an internship with one of the major brewers. And one of the very key ingredients in making a good glass of beer is having a good yeast strain. And I wanted to learn how to propagate the yeast strains, how to maintain to ensure that they were clean, and make sure that I had a really good foundation on developing a yeast strain. So
without getting too overwhelmingly technical, basically, when you have a wine yeast, for instance, that may reproduce a couple times, if that, and then with brewing, the yeast is sort of, you're using it over and over again. I mean, I know that wasn't very technical at all.
No, that's a good question. So in brewing, first of all, anywhere based on the beer style you're going to make, anywhere between 50 up to 70% of the flavor attributes come from the yeast strain.
Mm-hmm.
Approximately 95% of the beer is water. So those byproducts, the fermentation and the characteristics of that yeast strain are very critical to providing that overall profile. So to your question, you can very easily propagate the yeast up to 12 to 15 generations.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the craft brewers get a little high, up to 25 or so. The danger of having so many yeast generations, and a yeast generation is that you ferment it, you recover the yeast, and you pitch it again. That's a generation. Is that after about 17, 18 generations, you have danger of genetically changing the profile of that yeast, and you have different flavor attributes that might not be particular to the original yeast strain that you use.
Stinky beer.
Yeah. Stinky, funky, different. Yeah.
So sorry, getting back to what you said, you were propagating yeast and heading.
Yeah. So you the Midwest. Yeah, I work for a company called Red Star Yeast, and their business is propagating yeast. They made yeast for beer, wine, as well as for baking. Okay. And so I wanted to, as I pointed out, being that it's so important in making a good glass of beer, I wanted to learn everything and anything about yeast. So I worked for them for several years, and then after I thought I learned enough, then I moved on and joined Anheuser-Busch and worked for them for about 15 years, traveling the country as well as the world, for that matter.
Oh, yeah. So what countries did you go to?
So the last few years that I was with Anheuser-Busch, I was overseeing the brewing operations. We were brewing Budweiser under license, and so we had operations in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Dominican Republic, Panama, and Canada. And then that was just within the northern hemisphere, if you will, the Americas.
Yeah,
and then there was a whole bunch of other partnerships out in Europe and the rest of the world. But
so I imagine your Spanish language came in handy some of those places, or it definitely helped, especially going to Argentina, Chile, Panama. Was it like, coming from, pretty, I imagine, St. Louis or Missouri or whatever, where they have these massive operations, and where probably there's a bunch of massive operations that are pretty modern in the U.S. Did they have modern operations in those countries, or was it kind of,
Yeah, the operations, brewing hasn't really changed much. It's pretty basic as far as taking your basic ingredients. There's basically 5 ingredients. You have water, the malt, the hops, and the yeast. The technology comes in and the processing.
Sure.
And so the scale of the operations in Argentina, Panama, were much smaller, and that applies as well as in Europe. Mm-hmm. And so it's just different models as far as the economies of those countries relative to what we have in the U.S. In the U.S., we have mega breweries where we leverage the distribution network.
Yeah.
Relatively speaking, especially a few years back, the price of fuel was relatively inexpensive. So it made a lot of sense to have decentralized breweries throughout the U.S., and so you can supply different districts or regions within the U.S. Where you go to Argentina, Brazil, you basically have very small breweries supplying a very small area.
Okay.
Because of the cost of distributing and just the whole cold chain supply to maintain the beer fresh and so on.
Out of those countries, were there everybody makes beer, every country has. I think it's probably more widespread than wine growing even. So was there a bit of a culture there, and more in some countries than others? And were you surprised by, walking into a certain place and going, actually, these people really know a lot about beer or really appreciate it, whereas some other countries may not have as much and just kind of wanted cheap plunk, Was there a big difference that you saw?
No, if you go to Argentina, Chile, they have a very rich brewing tradition, as well as Mexico. And people know their beer.
Mm-hmm.
They know what a fresh beer is, meaning that it hasn't been oxidized, that it hasn't been adulterated. Is like any food product. If you consume it in long enough, you know the particulars of it, and you know what is in profile and what is not in profile. So as far as having beer that is spoiled or is not within spec, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
People can tell right away, and so it behooves those brewers to ensure that they have the utmost quality to retain their market share.
But
in
did
those
you
markets.
see like any, I don't know, maybe like more of a microbrew climate or any of a higher end appreciation in certain countries than others, or?
Yeah, the whole craft, the high end brewery, I think it's ever growing.
Yeah.
If you go into the major urban centers, like at the capital of Panama, there's a little bit of movement.
Mm-hmm.
But primarily, it's all about having the lager, kind of like American style, European style.
I mean, I think you could say that probably the same thing for New Zealand is, so the best breweries are kind of Auckland and Wellington, and maybe a few and speckled throughout the
Mm-hmm.
country. But you kind of have your bigger, easier beers in the countryside, and the sort of refinement maybe as you get into the urban areas. So that's probably, I get that. Cool.
Yeah, and in Mexico, in the capital, Mexico City, there's a huge movement on the whole craft scene.
Mm-hmm.
And you have very small brewers that are emerging, and they have small microbreweries that are developing and coming up with the box and Belgian style type of Hefeweizens, and
Cool.
yeah, so it's definitely on the move.
That's good. And then, so you work for them for, oh, wait a minute, I have one more question. Then, Canada, I mean, that's like, that's beer country up there.
Mhm.
Was that, what was the experience like up there?
Yeah, Canadians, the very unique thing about Canada is, and this is their law, is in order for you to sell beer, you got to brew it in that province. So every province has his brewery. So the partners that we had was actually Ambev, and we had 8 breweries where we actually brew Budweiser under license.
In 8 different provinces.
In 8 different provinces.
Wow.
And so that's kind of unique, and every province you went to is a little different culture.
I think the same goes for like wine distribution. It's kind of state run, and
Mhm.
it's sort of tough to get going, but once you get going, it can be pretty rewarding.
Yeah.
Well, cool. So then you finished up there and came back out this way, or was that about the same time?
Yeah, so actually Anheuser-Busch was bought out by InBev.
Mm-hmm.
So I stayed on for another year working domestically. I was doing a lot of process improvement work. When InBev bought out AB, they bought them for $52 billion, which is a huge purchase. And so they wanted to get the money back to the creditors as soon as possible. And so they identified a lot of low-hanging fruit where they would get the returns pretty quickly. And one area was focusing on the process, and we deliver in the first year over $350 million year over year on some of the process changes that were made. And there were a whole bunch of other changes when it came to marketing and so on and so forth. But so after that 1 year, then I decided to come home out west.
Mm-hmm.
Here in Sonoma. I have a small vineyard that I'm attending to. I am growing Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Petit Syrah, Zinfandel, and Grenache.
Yeah, I have to interrupt you for a second because I've been out to that vineyard a few times last year, and again to help pick. For some reason, in the middle of harvest, we're in the middle of a brewery here, so some noises are going to kick in.
Yeah, have a little compressor, yeah.
All right, there we go. We're back. We had a little air compressor go off here in the brewery. It gives like a real live feel to the podcast, you know. So anyway, like I was saying, I've been out to that to your vineyard and your house a bunch of times last year, and then again this year. And I think it's like there's a lot, a lot of beautiful places out there. I think it's a really beautiful place, kind of sort of slyly set back off. What is that? Is that what's that road that you go down there?
It's Arnold and Sperring.
Yeah.
Arnold Road, yeah.
And just a really cool house, and I don't know. I just always enjoyed going out there, finding an excuse to go out there, and that's why I came back this year in the middle of harvest to help pick.
Oh, thank you so much.
Pinot out there. Now, that was was that in your family before? Did you kind of find that when you came back this way, or what was?
Actually, I purchased the property. It's 33 acres while I was still in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
And so my vision, my dream was to purchase a plat of land so I could plant my own vineyard. So we've been tending to vineyards for over 50 years, the family has. We've been in Napa and Sonoma for a while. And that was my plan long term to plant my own vineyard and eventually make my own wine. I'm making my own wine as well as
and what's
beer.
that label going to be?
The label is under development. The vineyard is Ceja Farms, and so I'm still working on the actual name, but I have made Chardonnay, Cab. Last year I made a state-grown Petit Syrah.
Cool.
And this harvest I made Zinfandel and in Chardonnay. And so after the pad cast, you can probably taste some of the Chardonnay, see what you think of it. So.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say you got a bit of a venue here to sell when down the road if you do some release, so you maybe have some wine under your label here.
Oh, absolutely.
That's
the brewery. Obviously, the focus is the beer, so that's
sure.
its own entity. The wine is more of a personal thing that I have the vineyard, and that's my own label. So.
Yeah, cool. Well, I guess that's how you qualified for the podcast. Anyway.
Yeah.
No, I've actually wanted to really find a brewer because I've had some buddies who are sort of fellow winemakers in New Zealand that I went to school with and stuff that did a lot of brewing on the side, and because these guys were studying fermentation and enology and things like that, they weren't your typical home brewers. They had quite the process in the garage and lots of tanks and hoses and pumps, and they knew what they were doing. And as from what I could tell, it was a lot harder than making wine because you have to be a lot cleaner, and I think you have to really watch that because you're kind of always have a brew going. I think that's the one thing that people don't realize is that it's a constant grind. Brewing is like, whereas, winemaking, I think you have this big time of year, and then it sort of lulls a little bit, and then you have spurts of, work, steady work throughout the year. But with brewing, you guys are always got a mash going and always doing something. You're always over a steaming pot of something. So I have a real big respect for brewing, basically. So I wanted to talk to somebody about it.
Yeah, no, Dan, you bring an excellent point. Having both backgrounds, brewing definitely is a little bit more complicated. It requires a lot more discipline and processes. So it's a very natural drink. If you think about it, the malt, which is the body of the beer, is a grain. It's agricultural based, so very similar to grapes. They variate from year to year based on where the barley is grown, whether you had too much rain, not enough rain, and so on. So the key of a brewmaster to consistently brew your beer consistently, whether you make a Hefeweizen, Morena Ale, or a Carneros IPA, as your malt or barley changes from year to year, then that's where the brewmaster comes in, where you're constantly adjusting to ensure that you have that consistency.
Yeah, in winemaking, it's like you could have a year and be like, oh, it was a better year, or
right.
You're trying to get some consistency within certain brands, but I think you could even market it to say, hey, this is a different year and a different style, and Certainly for smaller wineries, that's always an option. I think when you get to a certain level, you're looking for more of a consistency. But with brewing, yeah, it's a totally different ballgame as that goes. So.
Yep. Yeah, and the other big thing is you basically start from a grain, and you basically have two different processes. The big one is malting, and that process consists of taking your grain, which is basically starch. It has the enzymes ingrained within your barley. Then you got to convert that grain into malt.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that process consists of is basically hydrating that barley seed. So automatically then the enzymes or that seed begins to think, hey, I want to grow into a barley plant.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a tremendous amount of enzymatic and biological activity that goes on. The biggest thing that's happening in a brewer standpoint is that you're creating a lot of enzymes,
Mm-hmm.
often beta amylase. So after the third day of the seed being hydrated and respiring, and you blowing off the CO2 and taking more water, you made enough alpha and beta amylases that you arrest all that activity, and you dry it and you're ready to use it in the brewing process.
Mm-hmm.
And then the brewing process, then you got to grind that. You transfer that into a mash vessel. We call it the mash tun. And in there you rehydrate that malt. At this point we call it malt. And then the enzymes kick in and begin to do their job. And so a starch is just a long chain of single unit sugars.
Mm-hmm.
And so the alpha amylase takes that long chain of carbohydrates and chops it into smaller pieces called dextrins. And then the beta amylase begins to reduce the ends of those smaller chains, which we call dextrins, to make your fermentable sugars. So based on the amount of cooking time that happens in the mash tun, that's where you make your heavier palate beers versus the more lighter, crisp beers.
Yeah.
And what's happening there is just all that activity that you allow the enzymes to digest the starch.
And you can come to the brewery here, the Carneros Brewing Company. We're on 121. We're basically kind of right down the street from Fremont Diner. For people nationally and probably internationally know that was kind of one of the big things on diners, drive-ins, and
it's right off Highway 12. The actual address of the brewery, it's right off It's 22985 Burndale Road, which is right off Highway 12.
Yeah. And so it's basically, you can see the building from 121 as you're cruising into Napa or Sonoma from San Francisco. And the way you've got this place set up is pretty cool. I came here for your sort of soft opening industry tasting, and you've got it set up kind of perfect for tours where we can literally sit there and drink while you explain how you do your thing with your mash and your kettle and everything right there. I do remember when I did that, though, you were explaining something that you do with your beers, maybe not every beer, but that maybe not produce that, and I think it's why I like your beers, is they're not over the top, huge, giant. They're a little more smoother, and it was something that you do. Explain.
Yeah,
that
let me just back up a little bit.
Okay.
Let me just go a little bit into the side. So we have a beautiful, in my opinion, beautiful brewery right in the heart of the Carneros region. We have a beer garden. We actually have a little lake with water fountains, and we have a lush garden that surrounds the lake where you can enjoy a picnic with your significant other, your family. Bring your kids, bring your cats, dogs, whatever you have. Play frisbee, and bring your blanket. And one of the things that we're going to be offering, as well as great beer, is artisan cheese, artisan breads, and artisan meats produced here in Sonoma Valley. The other big attraction that we have is our hop field. We have over an acre of hops that we grow.
Cool.
And we grow aromatic hops as well as bittering hops. And you can take a self-guided walk through the rows, so the 20-foot high trellis hop systems that we have. and you can come down and take a tour of our small batch brews that we make. We have a 7-barrel system, and you'll be tasting out of our tap room and enjoying our taste room bar here that you mentioned, Daniel.
Yeah, I think it's you're onto something here.
Yeah. So one of the things that Daniel you were speaking of was that the beers that I make is I'm into balanced beers where if you taste our Carneros IPA, it's about tasting the malt as well as the hops, the aromatics, the nice, delicate but yet balanced bitterness. We have estate-grown hops that we add to all of the beers that we make, and the types of hops that we grow in the bitter, and we have Columbus, Zeus hops. And then on the aromatic varietals, we have sauce as well as some cascades. And so between those varietals and some other varietals that we add in our Carneros IPA, it just makes for a balanced, hoppy, very drinkable IPA. And that speaks to our Hefeweizen, which is our Bavarian-style Hefeweizen. The color, it's a little on the amber side, but again, it's all about the yeast strain that I'm utilizing to brew that beer.
I think, without knowing a lot about beer, and I know that I like it, and why I like it is because it's balanced. And I tasted I think about 4 different beers that day. I think it shows a little more confidence and a little more experience than, hey, this is just, we chucked in a bunch of hops and it's like over the top giant hoppy beer, which personally I just get tired of pretty quick, you know what I mean? So I think that's a great direction that you're headed in. I'm sure you know why you're headed in that direction for many reasons, but it was something that I noticed right away when I came by that day was this is a little something different here, that the beers here are a little something different, and I'm excited to keep tasting them. So yeah, we're heading into the winter months here in Napa, and right now you're providing beers for some other bars or restaurants and private people, kind of, or what's the?
Yeah, so we're not officially open right here at the site. We have the ABC and TTB and I think any other federal agency, immigration and CIA. We have all those permits. We're still working with the Sonoma County and on some specific permitting for the site.
Sure.
So the site had a different use, and so we retrofitted to meet the needs of the brewery, and so we're almost there. So we're looking here in the next few weeks to get done and have the grand opening for the site. As far as the beer, the fact that we have ABC and TTB, we can sell beer to the local bars as well as restaurants. But the strategy behind developing our Carneros Brewing Company brand is to basically start doing it very grassroots, meaning that we're going to be self-distributing, and we want people to come and enjoy the beers and really have a great experience. Hopefully they'll enjoy the beer, then where they can tell their friends and their family, and then we want to have a very strong win here locally in Sonoma, Napa, and Petaluma. And then once we have that foundation, then we want to expand within a 100-mile radius, which will include
I think you're
Sacramento,
in a really
Francisco.
good position. Not only you're kind of in a good area where you're very accessible to Napa, and obviously very accessible to Sonoma, and their tie-ins to the wine industry I think are going to be very important. Everybody knows the cliche, it takes a lot of beer to make good wine, and I certainly know a lot of people I make wine with are really into their beers. So I think your sort of connections and obviously your family involvement in the wine industry, I think word's already spread. I would say that, and it's I think you're onto something. I'm excited to return and pass through again in 6 months and see where it's all headed.
Well, yeah, I'm personally very, very excited. I know that the family, the rest of the partners are also extremely excited. We have spent literally over 2 years to develop what we have, and we're almost there as far as getting it to the marketplace and having that feedback from people and taste our beer, and hopefully they can enjoy a few more and they can tell their friends.
Yeah, I think you've got the right attitude, and you're a calm, confident man that, you're making some good beers, and as we said, it's a beautiful place. I do want to mention a few of your websites here, carnerosbrews.com, to check out where things are headed. Also, Ceja Farms Vineyard, as we mentioned earlier, producer of Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, Petit Syrah, Zinfandel, Grenache, set in the heart of Sonoma Valley. Yeah, is there anything else you wanted to tell? I think we could dive in pretty good. I think I can come back and do this again soon and see how things are going, because believe it or not, we just did 30 minutes in a blink, so that went pretty fast, and we can watch the rest of this San Francisco 49ers game.
Sounds good, Daniel. Salud, and
Salud.
many
Cheers.
cheers. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks a lot.